Begin the new Masechta. Masechta is Taanis. Masechta relating to the laws of fasting, generally when there's a drought, when there's no water, especially in Talmudic times. And we are co-sponsors because of the Taanis Daf joining us today's Daf. In this Masechta, there's 4 parakim. The first parak, which we're going to start now, discusses regarding seasonal additions to Shemoneh Esrei, regarding things that we add in. Second and third parak discuss the structure of public fast days, how was it actually done. And the fourth parak discusses the Mamados, which were those 24 groups of Yisraelim that joined the Kahanim and Leviim when there were karbanos that were brought in the Beis Hamikdash. So what we're going to discuss in today's daf are when do we begin mentioning the powers of rain, what's called Gevuras Geshamim during the davening, which is Masha Baruch Mardei Geshem. 3 keys that Hashem does not let out of His control. There's a lot of Agadah teachings in Sefer Taanis. Some key terms and concepts discussed in today's daf is what's called Gevuras Geshamim, which is the might of the rain, referring to the fact that Hashem brings rain to the world. That on Sukkot is when we get judged regarding the water. Avodah Shibalev refers to Tefillah because that's a service that a person does in his heart. That when it rains on Sukkot, it's a sign of a curse. And therefore, you really wouldn't want to mention rain on Sukkot. And this Chamayim is a special once a year on Sukkot, the water libations that are brought in the morning with the Tamid Shel Shachar. So begin the current daf. The Masechta Mesechtas Taanis, the first parak Me'emasai, the Beis Me'emasai. Says the Mishnah, from when are we maskirin Gevuras Geshamim? Do we mention the might of the rain? Meaning that we say Masha Beruach, that he brings the wind and the Mardei Geshem and he has the rain come down. The Gemara is going to explain why we're calling it Gevuras Geshamim is because it's Yorid B'Gevura come down with might, like it says in the Pasuk Eisek Gedolos, as we'll see in the Gemara. Now, so when do you start saying Masha Beruach Mardei Geshem? So it's a machlekes of the Mishnah. He says Miyom Tov Harishon Shel Chag. From the first day of Sukkot is already starting the winter season is when you start saying Masha Baruch Mardei Geshem. Shloimy says no, Miyom Tov Ha'achron Shel Chag. From the last day of Sukkot, that's when you say Masha Baruch Mardei Geshem. As Taisa explains, as we'll see in the Gemara, that means the Shmini Atzeres, because you don't sit in the Sukkah anymore. And even he says even today's times that we sit is only Midrabanan because it's Sveika. Even though we know Kriyat Yachi explains why would we sit, but Al Kapanim during the 7 days of Sukkot, Rabbi Shloimy doesn't hold you can say Masha Baruch Mardei Geshem, because as we'll see in the Gemara, that's a siman klala, it's a sign of a curse for it to rain. So why would I mention Mardei Geshem? So he says no. On the last day of Sukkot, and Shemini it says you don't sit in the Sukkah anymore. That's when you start saying Masha Baruch Mardei Geshem. And normally Rabbi Shloimy, and this is actually what Rabbi Shloimy says to Rabbi Eliezer, he says, I understand. Since the whole idea of rain on Sukkot is a sign of a curse, like the Gemara says in Sukkah, that when you let it clear out from eating in the Sukkah, when the porridge that you're eating is starting to get wet, which you could compare it to a servant that's coming to pour a cup for his master, and he throws the cup on his face and says, I don't need your service. In other words, when it rains on Sukkot, everyone leaves. And looks like Kadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want us to serve him. So why would you be mentioning rain, Mardei Geshem, on a Yom Tov when it's a bad thing? So Eliezer says to him, Afani lo mati lishol. I didn't say to ask for rain. This that you're saying, that why would you start mentioning Gevuras Geshamim on Sukkot? It looks like as if you're davening for it to rain. It's not true. I didn't say to daven for the rain on Sukkot, like saying the same Talmud. It's just to mention it in its designated time. Meaning that you start mentioning on Sukkot the might of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that He brings down the rain as a way of a preparation. So Amalai, so Rabbi Shua says to him, boy, Imkain, if that's the case, then why do you ever stop saying Masha Baruch Mardei Geshem even by Pesach time? Loyal mihim asker. So the person should always say, you're telling me that it's not that you're asking for it, you're just talking about the Shvach of the Rebbeinu Shalom, that is Masha Baruch Mardei Geshem. So why are you starting it now on Sukkot? Why do you ever stop? Always say it all year round. So therefore, that's Rabbi Shua's response to Rabbi Eliezer. Now the Mishnah continues and says, however, ain't shoyl in the Geshamim. We'll see in the Gemara actually what does that mean, but it sounds like the request for the rain is ela samach Geshamim. That's only close to the time of the rain. So again, according to Rabbi Eliezer, that would be like the word shoylin would be b'sein talamata, which he agrees that you're not going to ask for that on Sukkot. According to Rabbi Shua, it's the same thing with Masha Baruch Mardei Geshem. You wouldn't even mention it until it's close to the time of the rain, and hence you wouldn't say it on the whole Yom Tov of Sukkot because we only want it after Sukkot. Rabbi Huda Eimer, he says a third opinion. He says, whoever davens for the Amid on the last day of Sukkot. So he differentiates not like Rabbi Yeshua who just said you say it from the last day. He says depends which tefillah. Ha'achrain, the last one, meaning referring to the Baal Musaf, he's masker. He mentions as we do Masha Beruach Omer Dageshem. Harishain ain't a masker. The first one doesn't mention. So Baal Shachas is not going to say, and Baal Musaf is going to say. And so too regarding stopping. Yom Tov Shal Pesach, on the first day of Pesach, Harisha masker, we're still saying Masha Beruach Omer Dageshem. The first one, the Baal Shachas is going to say it. Ha'achrin in a masker, the one who's davening musaf, he's not going to go ahead and mention anymore. That's when you stop. So the differences between shachas and musaf, both when you start and when you end according to that of Rabbi Yehuda. So we said three opinions in our Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer says you start Masha Baruch Medageshem from the first day of Sukkot. Shur says the last day, and Rabbi Yehuda differentiates when we even on the last day if it's from musaf and not from shachas. Well, Rabbi Shua is saying that from the last day, he doesn't differentiate. He seems to be saying even possibly from Ma'ariv or Shachas, and then Rabbi Yehuda says from Mitzvah, right? It doesn't say, but Rabbi Yehuda is differentiated. So the Gemara says, Tana Hecha Diktoni Me'emasai. Says you start off the Mishnah saying Me'emasai. From when do you start saying Geburus Kisham that you say Masha Baruch Medageshem? So obviously, it's obvious to the Tana that you have to say it. Where did he see that you have to say it? That he's going on. He's saying, "Oh, this that we know that you have to." That from when is that? Where do you ever say that you have to? Says the Gemara, Tana Hasam Kai. He's going on the Tana as we learned in the Mishnah Sefes Brachas. Learned it said Maskirin Gevuras Kishamim that you have to mention the might of the rain, but in the second bracha of Shemona Esrei in the bracha when Hashem revives the dead, and B'Sholim Birchas Hashanim you have to ask for B'Sein Talamater in the bracha of Baruch Aleinu. V'Havdalah, you have to make Havdalah B'China Das. So you see that there's halacha of being masked Kivurus Gesham. Okay, but Tanya, and that's what we're saying over here. Me'im Esem Miskin Kivurus Gesham. This halacha that you have to mention it. Where from when do you say it? So the Gemara, is that really so? But Velisni Hasam. Then say this explanatory Mishnah over there in Brachas. Ma'ishna D'Shav Get Hacha. Why are you leaving it till here? In other words, you said in Say Demoyed Me'emasai. You're saying here in Say Demoyed in Taanis Me'emasai. Say it over there that you should be maskir in Mesechus Brachas. You said that you mentioned it at Seder Zram. It's a whole different Seder. Why are you waiting till our Mesechta to start explaining our Mishnah Mesechus Brachas? So Elarada says the Gemara, don't say when we're saying Me'emasai is going on following on the Mishnah Mesechus Brachas from Say Demoyed. Rather, Tana that Meirish Hashanah actually is going on what we learned in the previous Mesechta, Mesechta Rosh Hashanah, where it's in the same Seder. So therefore, you can't say, why do you wait up until here? It's not, as we learned in the Mishnah Mesechta Rosh Hashanah. The Mishnah says, Ubechag Nidoinin Alamayim. Said on Sukkot is when you get judged on the water. We had the Arba Rosh Hashanah, and one of the Rosh Hashanahs was Sukkot. I did the Tan Ubechag Nidoinin Alamayim. So once we're mentioning that on Sukkot you get judged on the water, so the logic of the Tana was that since you're getting judged on the water, so obviously you have to mention the idea of water to appease for the water that it should come as a blessing. So therefore, Tana we learn when we're mentioning the might of the rain is going to be on the Yom Tov Sukkot, which is when you're getting judged for it. So like we say all the piyutim in this now, we're going to be mentioning this because that's when you're getting judged. Says the Gemara, okay, fine, that explains why we're saying it over here in this Masechta, starting off Me'emasai. But listening Me'emasai al Hagasham. We should just say that from when you start mentioning regarding the rain. My Gevuris Kisham, what's the terminology of the might of the rain? So Rabbi Yochanan, he says, Meshiur D'Migvur. Because they come down with Hashem's might. It says the pasuk in Eiv. And the gear says Ve'ein Cheker. Hashem does greatness that's unfathomable. And the flois Adein Misbar and wonders that cannot be counted. Now, Ksivit says after that, that he places the rain on the face of the earth. And he sends the water on the face of the outsides. Now, so my mashmo says the Gemara, where do you see over here anything about gevura? I understand it says about gedula, but what do you see about gevura? That it's referring to rain. So Rabbi Shloimy says, I'll tell you. We learn out Gzeir Shava where it says in cheker, and it says here and by Brias Ha'olam. Ksivach says about Isaac Gedolas, and the gears again is vein chaker. Hashem does greatness that's unfathomable, that you can't be chaker. Ksivach says over there, pasuk in Yeshaya, lo yadata, don't you know? I'm lo shamata, didn't you hear? Elokei olam Hashem. God is the king of the. He's the God of the world is Hashem. He creates the ends of the earth. Lo yoif, lo yoga. He's not tired. He's not worn out. In chekelis v'nasai. There's no fathoming his insight. So you see both of them say cheker, ein cheker. Now it says in the pasuk in Tehillim. So if we're comparing Yeridus Geshamim to Bris Ha'olam. So in regard to Bris Ha'olam, it says Mechen Horn B'Koichai. He prepares the mountains with his strength. Nezeh B'Gvur is girdled with might. So obviously, this that says cheker by rain and it says cheker by creation of the world, just like the creation of the world, it says regarding it Gevura. So too, by rain, it's like as if it says Gevura. Which Taisus wonders, it says, okay, but there's other words there also. Why calling it Dafka Gevuras Geshamim? It says also Kayach, it says also Gedula. So why picking specifically calling it Gevuras Geshamim? So it says Taisus that, yeah, because first of all, Gevuras is the first thing that's mentioned. And also, because Kayach and Gedula are all included in, I mean, the Gevuras is because the bracha that we're saying, Ate Gibor, the second bracha of Shemoneh Esrei, we start Ate Gibor Leil Mashem. So we're mentioning rain in that bracha, we're going to mention it as Gevuras. And also, because he says actually Gevura includes Kayach and Gedula, which are the other things mentioned in the Pasuk, that's why we call it Gevuras Gesham. Okay, it says Gemara, Manola de Betvilo. You're telling me that grain is compared to the Bris Olam, therefore call it Gevura and Gevuras Gesham, and you have to mention it on the first day of Sukkot or the last day of Sukkot, because that's when the Nedoinin Alamayim. But how do you know you mention it during davening? So Gemara to tell like learn a Brisa. Pasuk in the Devar. La'avas Hashem lekechem, to love Hashem your God, u'la'avdu b'chol vavchem, and to serve Him with all your heart. Ezehi avodah shibalei, which, how do you serve Hashem with your heart? Avam is a tefillah. That's tefillah because that's the whole point, is that a person is reflecting on who he is and what he is, and that's done in a person, the focus of his heart. Now, Ksiv Basrei, I want to say after, and this is the Parsha of Shemaya, it says, when the Sati B'tar Arts can be eaten, and I will give the rain of your land in its designated time. Yoram Malkush, the early and the late rains. So you see that in Ulavdi B'chalavavchem, in Tefillah, is where you mention Mitar Artzachem, Yoram Malkush. That's how you know that the mentioning of the rain, which is what we do on Sukkah, is to be Mefayis and Miratza Hashem, because in the Dein Al-Mayim is going to be done in Ulavdi B'chalavavchem, which is in Tefillah. Now, relating the idea from Rabbi Yechanan, continue on this theme of rain. Rabbi Yechanan says, Gimel Mafteches B'Yodah Shal Kadosh Baruch Hu. There's three keys that are in the hand of Hashem. Shlei Nimtzer B'Yad Shlich, that He didn't give over, as Rashi explains, to one shliach altogether. Just Taisus explains also. You find sometimes that Hashem gave over to Ches HaMeisim, He gave over rain to Eliyahu, to Elisha, but that's it says that. It means to say that it wasn't given over forever, Taisus says. Like that you're in charge. Some things Hashem says, okay, you're in charge, I'm not in charge. I get to take away the keys of Allah, but these three keys are they were never given over. It's Hashem's keys. And they are Maftech Shel Geshamim, the key of rain, Maftech Shel Chaya, the key of childbirth, Maftech Shel Tches HaMeisim, and the key of reviving the dead, as the Gemara explains. Maftech Shel Geshamim, where do we find the key of rain? The Chilek says, Pasuk in the Devarim. Yiftach Hashem Lacha. Hashem will open to you, meaning not an agent. Es Oitzorah HaToiv, His good storehouse. Es Hashemayim, the heaven. Losses Matar Artzacha B'Itay, to give the rain of your land. And it says in the time, it's Hashem who does it. Key number 2. Maftech Shel Chayim B'nai. Where do we know the key of childbirth? Because the Chassidus says the pasuk in Bereshis, V'yizker Elikim Es Rachel. God remembered Rachel V'yishmer Zikatin Tamid Beis Eleho Elikim, and God listened to her. V'yiftach Es Rachel, and He opened up her womb. So you see that it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu that is doing childbirth. And key number 3 is Maftech Shel Tchias HaMeisim. Where do we know the key of reviving the dead? It's like the pasuk in Yecheskel. It says, V'yidatim, you should know Ki Ani Hashem, because I am Hashem, meaning, and not an agent. But Pischis, Kivrei Seichem, when I open up your graves, which is Tchias HaMeisim. Now, the Marava Amri, in Eretz Yisrael, in the West, they added Av Maftech Shel Parnasa. Also the key of a livelihood, of a Parnasa. The Chassidus says a pasuk in Tehillim, famous pasuk, Poisech es yodecha. You open up your hand, which is Hashem's hand, and not that of a shliach, which actually the Rosh Tevis of these 4 keys is the word Maftech itself. The word mem is matar, pei is parnasa, tov is chesamesim, and ches is chaya. The word maftech itself, key, it actually refers to these 4 keys. Now says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan, well, why didn't Rabbi Yochanan count the key of parnasa as a 4th key? Amalach, I tell you, Geshamim, hainu parnasa. Rain is parnasa. We already counted that, and that's where the primary, when we daven, that's included that of rain, and therefore he doesn't count that as a separate key. It said in the Mishnah, this machlekes regarding when do you start saying Gevurus Geshamim, when do you start saying Masha Baruch Ma'ad Geshem? Shabbat he said, Miyom Tevarishon Shalchag B'chulu, you start saying Masha Baruch Ma'ad Geshem for the first day of Sukkot. Now, with the following question. Rabbi Eliezer, as we'll see, we have many different opinions when we start saying, and we're going to find sources for them. So Rabbi Eliezer, where does he get this idea from that you start saying Masha Baruch Ma'ad Geshem on the first day of Sukkot? And that is the Lulav Gamala. Is he learning it out from the mitzvah of Lulav? Or Minisach HaMayim Gamala? Is he learning out from the mitzvah of the water libations? As the Gemara explains what the question is. Do we say Lulav Gamala? He's learning out from Lulav, which it's similar to Lulav, because just like you cannot have the Dal Minim without rain, and they're coming to appease for the waters, the Gemara says in Sukkah, that's what the Dal Minim each are when you shake it in different directions, coming to appease for the Mayim. So too the world cannot survive without water, which is Masha Baruch Amard Hageshem, asking for mentioning the rain, and therefore we're comparing that just like lulav, ma lulav b'yayim, just like lulav, which you start taking on the first day of Sukkot, and that's why you start mentioning Masha Baruch Ma'ad Geshem on the first day of Sukkot. Now, but it's not just on the first day; it's the first day on daytime. So avas kor b'yayim. So too, you wouldn't mention then Masha Baruch Ma'ad Geshem from the night when you come in the night of Sukkot until the next day, because you don't shakal the lulav on Sukkot by night, only shakal during the daytime. So then you'd only start mentioning Masha Baruch Ma'ad Geshem at the daytime. Maybe no. He learns out the halacha of Masha Baruch Ma'ad Geshem from the Nisach HaMayim. And Ma Nisach HaMayim Urta, just like the water libations. The Gemara tells us in Sukkot of Nanal V'Mabeis that they would fill up the vessels with water for the Nisach HaMayim at nighttime. Damamar. Now, where do we get this idea from? Because the Gemara says regarding a pasuk of the Midbar, when it talks about minchasim and iskayim, a carbon is often brought with the libations. That includes flour libation and wine. Now, that has halacha afila balayla, meaning you can even though the carbon itself is to be brought during the daytime. However, the libations could be brought during the nighttime. Now, Rashi comes to explain that although generally the carbon it's brought during the daytime, and you could bring the menachas and the sachem the following nighttime, but what we want to learn out is here also the Nisach HaMayim could also be done during the nighttime, just like all nesachim could be at nighttime. So therefore, afas kor me'urta, Rashi explains. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, you would start saying Masha Baruch Ma'ad Geshem from the first night of Sukkot, where you'll start mentioning Gevurus Geshamim because the Nesachim could be at nighttime. Yeah, usually it's afterwards. So it would sound like it shouldn't be the first night of Sukkot, it should be the second night of Sukkot, because the carbon where you bring Nesachim for is only on day one. That's what Taisus go through to explain. But once we see Nesachim be at nighttime, which again usually it's after the carbon, but it could be at nighttime, so therefore we would say it already from the first night of Sukkot, and you wouldn't wait to the first day. That would be the question if you're learning it from Lulav, so you start to say Masha Baruch Ma'ad Geshem from the first day, or if you learn from the Nisach HaMayim, that you would start saying it already from the first night, because the Nesachim could be at nighttime, and it's referring to water, and that's Nisach HaMayim. That's what we're davening for. We say Masha Baruch Ma'ad Geshem.
Why does it say sukkah? You could say that also starts at
no, because yes, so Nisach HaMayim versteht sich was the Mayim, right? And that's why we do it Mayim. And Lilav is also, like Rashi explains, is because they come for the rain, that we shake in all different directions, the shuckling is, so therefore these are two different things that are related to water, which are sukkahs related. The question is, would it be daytime or would it be nighttime? So the says Tashamat Spinga Raya, where the Amar Rebavo, he says, Leilum de Rebbe Eliezer, Elam Lulav. He learns it out only from Lulav, which again, therefore you're going to start on the first day, not at nighttime. Now, this that he says it's from Lulav, there's two different versions. Ikadami, there's someone who say Bevo Gemara Gamala. So it's just a tradition Bevo had that Rabbi Eliezer only learns that from Lulav. But Ikadami, those that say Masnita Shmile. No, actually, he actually has a brisa that Rabbi Eliezer learns that from Lulav. And Mahi, what's that brisa? Which is the second version. There's not like learn the brisa. It says Meimus and Miskin al Geshamim. From when do you mention regarding the rain of Mashav Roch Medegeshem? Eliezer Oimi says Mishas Netilas Lulav. From the moment when you take the Lulav. So you see, when he's referring to day one, he says about the shackling of lulav, and it's going to be at the daytime, not at nighttime. Sure, he says, Mishas Hanochasai, from the time when you put it down, where Rashi says, the day that you make the bracha the last time, which is day 7, which is how we said in the Mishnah, that Yeshua holds on the last day of Sukkot, which actually made it sound like from Taisus that it's on Shmini Atzeres, where that seems to be a discussion in the Rishonim exactly what that is. Taisus says from the 8th day, which is when you are not sitting in the sukkah anymore, so then it wouldn't be a Simon Klala. Rashi over here says that Yeshua is saying, Neshas and the Chasai, he learns the last days on the 7th day when you put it down. The question is, does the 7th day mean by Mincha, or is it the Ma'ariv after the day that you put it down? Bal Kabbalah, he said Neshas and the Chasai. Now, Amr Rabbi Eliezer, he says, and explains his opinion, he says, and this is what answers what we mentioned before. Since these dalad minim ein boim el ratzas al mayim, the whole purpose of the dalad minim is to go out and appease regarding the water. That's the service of the shuckling. So just like these dalad minim cannot be without water, they also are godol al mayim. They need rain to. The estrich is the one tree that we always say is godol al kol mayim. The aravis is are from the nachal, from the water. They all need water. So too, the world cannot survive without water. And therefore, when you start chuckling the lulav, is when you start mentioning Mashav Roch Medegeshem. B'Shur tells him, he says that b'chag ein elasim klala. Says, what do you mean? How could you be mentioning rain, Mashav Roch Medegeshem on Sukkot? It's a sign of a curse, as we explained from the Gemara Masechet Sukkah. So Rabbi says, I didn't say to ask for rain. Elahaska, just to mention it. Which, when you say Mashav Roch Medegeshem, you just the first 3 brachas are all shvach. You're not saying any request. Says, what do you mean? Just like you mentioned, the revival of the dead all year round, but in Lamaisa, it's only going to happen when it's going to happen. I mean, it's obviously not for right now, it's for whenever it's going to happen. He says, yeah, that even in the summer months, if a person wants to, he can mention Mashav Roch Medegeshem, because I'm not asking for it now, it's when it's going to be, it should be. If you want to mention all year, you can mention it. It's no problem. So don't ask on me, why am I saying on Sukkot? You can mention it all year round. Now, however, Rabbi says, I say, the moment that you stop on Pesach from asking for rain, from saying V'sein Talamata, you stop mentioning Gevur's Gesham. You don't mention Mashav Roch Medegeshem anymore. And so Rashi explains what Rabbi trying to say. He says, now you cannot say that if you want to mention all year round Mashav Ruach, and that's what Rabbi Eliezer Taanis was trying to explain for himself. So you could say it on Sukkot too, because you could say it all year round. No, it's not true. You don't say it. Rather, in the summer months, you're not going to mention it because it's not this man for rain. So therefore, also in Sukkot, you're not going to mention it because since it's not a Simon Bracha, Rabbi is essentially saying like Rabbi Shua, saying Mezuknish. You stop by Pesach time. When you stop asking, you stop mentioning. And therefore, you're not going to start again. You're not going to say it through the summer, and you're not going to start again on Sukkot because it's a Simon Klala. Now, another opinion, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, he says that actually, B'Sheni B'Chag Hu Masker. He says that you start saying Mashav Roch on the 2nd day of Sukkot. Kiva Aimer says B'Shish B'Chag Hu Masker. You start saying on the 6th day of Sukkot. And Rabbi Yehuda Mishum Rabbi Shua Aimer, which that's like we said Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah, which could be it's like you had asked, is that different Rabbi Shua? But it's maybe a version of Rabbi Shua. He says depends. If someone goes to daven with Amin on the last day of Sukkot, so ha'achrein, the one who's davening Musaf, he's going to be masked. He's going to mention Mashav Roch Medegeshem. Harisha, the first one, the Baal Shachris, he's in a masked. He's not going to mention Mashav Roch Medegeshem. And that's regarding starting. A ending, B'Yom Tov Rishon Shal Pesach, when you're by the first day of Pesach at the end of the winter season, Harisha masked, the first one, the Baal Shachris, is still going to say Mashav Roch Medegeshem. Ha'achrein in the masked. The Baal Musaf, he's not going to mention anymore Masha Baruch, and then that's when we stop saying Masha Baruch, Mordei Geshem. Now, the Gemara goes back to the first opinions that we mentioned. Shabbat Kamalei Rebbe Lezer Yeshua. Seemingly, Rebbe Lezer has a good time to Yeshua. That he's saying, just like you mentioned Tchias HaMesim all year round, even though it's not the time for Tchias HaMesim, but we mentioned it, that it should happen when it's supposed to happen, so too you should mention Geburus Kishom if you want to all year round, and even on Sukkot. Even though it's not a Simcha Bracha, but you can mention it because you're not asking for it, you just mentioned the Shvach, that whenever it should happen, so what's the problem? So Rabbi Shloimy would tell you, no, you can't compare the two of them. You know why? Yes, it makes sense that every single day, 3 times a day, we daven for Tchias HaMesim, because the Kuliyam is imnahu. It really is at every moment, every day is the time. Hashem, that's it. Bring Mashiach, make Tchias HaMesim right now. Achshav. And Shaman, but rain, you think Kol Emes to Asin Zemanayu? You think anytime Hashem is going to bring it, it's the time for it? It's not. It's a bad thing. But now we learn the Mishnah Masechtas. We learn later on that we Beis and Beis. The Mishnah tells us, Yatsa Nisan v'Yardi Geshem. Let's say the month of Nisan has already passed, and now we're in Iyar, and it's raining. It's a sign of a curse. Shalak says a pasuk in Shmuel Aleph. Pasuk says, but it's a time of harvesting the wheat today, and he says that I'm going to call out to Hashem, and he's going to bring kailos, there's going to be sounds, and it's going to rain, and you're going to know because your evil is much that you did in the eyes of Hashem to ask for yourself a king. So we see that since it's not the time for it, it's considered as a bad, like it's a sign of a curse. So therefore, it's not the Zman, and we're not going to mention it, and therefore, just like in the summer, so too in Sukkot, it's not an appropriate time, and that's what Rabbi Shua would say to Rabbi Eliezer, no, it's not true, like it's amazing, look amazing, every moment I want it to happen. But here, I don't want it every moment, because it's going to be bad at certain times, therefore you're not going to mention Masha Baruch Mordei Geshem, not in the summer, and not in the first days of Sukkot. Now, continuing with the opinions that we said, Rabbi Yehuda Meseir Omer, these 2 new opinions we mentioned, that B'Sheni B'Chag U'Maskeh, it says you start mentioning the second day of Sukkot. It says, my time you say, where does he get this from? Why the second day of Sukkot? Time like the Bryce, one of the well-known Ramazim of Nisach HaMayim. Rabbi Meseir Omer says like this: when it talks about the 7 days of Sukkot, every day it mentions the Nesachim. Unlike some Yom Tov, it just says what Nesachim are, like Pesach, they're all the same. By Sukkot, we know if you look at the davening, every day you got to make sure you know which day of Chol Hamoed it is, because it's Yom HaSheni, HaShlishi. You have to keep track. Why? Because every day the Nesachim keep on changing. So in the Pesukim, it mentions the Nesachim of every single day. The thing is, it's interesting, it says it's slightly different wording on certain days. B'Sheni, it says V'niskehem. Now, it could have just said V'niska, but it's saying V'niskehem, with an endement. Now, V'nemar, B'shishi, U'nesacheha. It says on day 6, U'nesacheha. Well, I could have just said V'niska. I didn't need that Yud. And then B'shvi, Kimishpatam. It also says on day 7, according to their mishpat, with an endement. I didn't have to say, I could have just said Kimishpat. So, Hare, you have Mem Yud Mem, as we pointed out. First day, it had the extra and the Mem, and that's on day 2. Day 6, it had extra Yud, and on day 7, it had an extra Mem. So that spells out Mayim. So you have water. Mekan, them is Nisach HaMayim and Torah. So that's an allusion to the mitzvah of Nisach HaMayim, which is really Halacha Moshe Sinai, but you have a remes for it of the water libations from the Torah. And therefore, that's going to be the same thing that we said, that we learned it out from Nisach HaMayim, at least according to this Mandalma. And just like when you start Nisach HaMayim, so too is when you're going to start Masha Baruch Mordei Geshem. It says, but why are you picking specifically day 2? Because when you start the illusion of the word Mayim, it's alluding at the day 2. So therefore, on day 2 is when you're going to mention it, because since on day 2 they have the extra endemem that starts off the drasha, so that's why you start mentioning on day 2. That's the source for that opinion. Kibayim says, no, B'shish B'chag U'Maskeh. It says you mention it on the 6th day of Sukkot. Why? Then B'shish, it says on day 6, as we mentioned, it says U'nasacheha, and its libations. What does that mean, its libations? Is B'shnei Nisuch Nakasim Dabat. The pasuk is telling you that one carbon is going to have 2 libations. One is the regular wine libations, and one's going to be the additional water libations, because as Rashi points out, you might be wondering, What do you mean? On day 2, it said v'niskeihem. There also says plural. That's why he's saying you start on day 6. It says Rashi, no, v'niskeihem, in contrast to unesecha, and nesecheim means many nesuchim for many kabbalas. So therefore, Rabbi Kiva didn't dash it from v'niskeihem that you see there's a water libation, but a nesecha means it's libations. There's a singular with a plural. And therefore, that's on day 6, when you can have one carbon, there's 2 libations, which is the water libations. Now says the Gemara, how do you know that it's referring to water and wine? Which you tell me that's what Nisachai Mayim, and therefore that's when you start saying Mashav Rechem Legeshem, Tavai Dechamra. Maybe both of them are wine libations. Says the Gemara, no. Because Sabal Kabud Meseira. On the one hand, Rabbi Kiva holds the Kabud Meseira. That you do have the Mem Yud Mem, which is including Nisachai Mayim. The Amar that he says Remizi Maya, that you were alluding to the water over here by the Nasach. Says Gemara, as you continue to Gimel and Aleph, so is somebody called Yud Meseira, so they become a say. So why doesn't he say like him that you should start mentioning on day 2? So Gemara, look, Rabbi Kiva holds Kik Seb Nisach Yiseira Beshishu Deseb. In other words, when the Sacheha is telling you that on day 6 you're going to have 2 Nisuchim for 1 carbon, so there you start saying on day 6. But what he does use from the Mem Yud Mem of Mayim is that you cannot say that both of them are Yain. In other words, he doesn't hold that because it spells it out, Mem Yud Mem, that's going to tell you that you do it in all those days, or that you start on that day. No, the only day that tells us that there's going to be this double libation is on the Nesacheha. But how do I know it's going to be water? Then I'll use that Mem as a Mem Yud Mem to tell me that there's going to be an added libation of water. But which day is that going to be? That's going to be on the 6th day. So again, just to summarize, we had 5 opinions when we begin to say Mashav Rechem Legeshem. Leazah says in day 1, why? Because that's Shas Netilas Lulav, and therefore it's going to be during the daytime. Shiur says Mishas Nachasim, when you put it down, again, discussion of Rishonim, does that mean on day 7? Or Mincha is that day 8, when you put it down, because again, then there's no Masima Kalala, because you're not sitting in the Sukkah on Sheminat says. Rebbe says that when you stop asking, so too, that's when you stop mentioning. And Yehudim Seir says that it's the 2nd day of Sukkot, because it's said of the Mayim, and the first Mem is on day 2. And Mekiva says, because that's Unasachaha, that there's 1 carbon with 2 libations, make it to any time. For those things.